Salutations, gentle viewers. I am George from Ireland. So this is a video about nationalism in its manifold manifestations, since one of my innumerable adoring fans has requested that I make such a video. Nationalism is something which is perennially fascinating, certainly is to me, because it comes in so many different overlapping forms. It has such a strong emotional purchase on people. It's forever changing, it's mystifying, it defies any straightforward definition. And it's something which can be very long-term, something which can emerge quite suddenly. A national identity or a nation can disappear, can reappear. It's scintillating. So I'm also fascinated by etymology. So it's worth noting that nationalism obviously is derived from natus, as in birth, like natal and so on. So people say, this is my land, I was born here. Or even if you weren't born here, wherever that here is, your mother, your father, your grandparents, it's got something to do with family. So it's heritable. However, you can move and join another nationality. You can have dual nationality. You can have the nationality of more than one country. Is nationality the same as citizenship? Again, that's debatable. So these words overlap. Take the Soviet Union. When it existed, they were all Soviet citizens. They talked about different nationalities, as in of all the Union republics. There was even, in the early days, the People's Commissar for nationalities, as in for the non-Russian ethnic groups. And that was Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, better known as Stalin. Lovely. And, well, he's an interesting case in point, being a Georgian who's then a icon of Russian nationalism for some to this day, and he wasn't even fully Georgian, he's partly Ossetian, and then that comes into North Ossetia, South Ossetia, and so on. So what other words which overlap semantically with nationalist? We've got patriot, which is obviously derived from pater, or pater, you may pronounce it as in father, being patriotic. People talk about their fatherland, or in some cases motherland. It's fascinating the way Germany was a fatherland. France is la patrie, as in fatherland, except it's feminine. La patria in Spain, or indeed Italy. Let me see. So motherland in Turkey, mother India. Where else? In Russia, well, they say rodina, but that's to do with birth. So sometimes people translate it as motherland. And Ireland, we talk about mother Ireland. We personify Ireland as female, as Roshindu, as dark Rosaline, and so forth. So it's scintillating to see how women are sometimes used as a representative of the country Britannia for Great Britain, or perhaps for the United Kingdom as a whole. Hibernia sometimes depicted as a female. There's Marianne for France, more examples. Then there was Uncle Sam in the United States, Johnny Cannock for Canada. These fictional figures, nobody believed they were ever real, or Johnny Rebel for the Confederate part of the United States. So it is intriguing. Let's say that the erstwhile Confederacy, which only existed for 4 years, which was totally and ignominiously defeated, and yet has a very potent hold on some people's imagination and identity. So how did we get here? Well, we all came out of the Rift Valley in Africa. It's a point that's worth repeating. Perhaps I labour it. So we're all related somewhere along the line 3 million years ago. Tribes, we spread out. Were African people smarter to just stay there, where it was at such a temperature that we didn't need to build houses? So there was a lot of low-hanging fruit or very fertile soil or cattle. And why on earth would you want to end up in somewhere that's freezing cold, very difficult to live? We need furs, so we need to build a house to survive. We need to make a fire. But there we were. So why do we look different? I suppose some people needed more melanin because they lived in the sunnier parts of the world. Others needed less. So we evolved slightly differently. Obviously, we're all the same species. The difference between the blackest person and the whitest person is absolutely infinitesimally small in terms of DNA. Why do some of us have larger noses and smaller noses? I wonder if it's to do with losing heat. And that tiny difference might be the difference between life and death in certain parts of the world. Obviously, you live in a very cold climate, you want to lose as little heat as possible. You live in a very hot one, you need to lose it. Like, desert foxes having large ears to lose heat. So soon we needed to carve out territory, and this land wasn't big enough for the both of us. If we're nomadic peoples going around with our herds of cattle, camels, horses, we're itinerants, or we practice sedentary agriculture and there's only so much fertile land. So there are all sorts of stories about how people came to be in places, and these tales are very important in bonding groups. Lore is the glue that holds people together. Sometimes false stories, they're myths. A lot of people don't grasp what a myth is, but sometimes they were told as though they were true, and then later on we realized that these things were imaginary, but some people then reinterpret it to say, well, we're only supposed to take a certain moral out of it. It's like, it's parabolic or something. It's not actually veritable, what happened. It's not veracious, I should say. So clans are perhaps the smallest kind of nation, and what's it is a clan and a tribe? A clan are all supposed to have a common ancestor or ancestress, and I wonder if that's ever true. People get conquered, and as they're subjugated, they are adopted by one people or other. So nations are Protean, they are forever in flux, and there are many nations now which are forgotten by history, come back into being. We sometimes trace ourselves to a state which existed in that same territory, like, Iraq, looking back to ancient Babylonia or Mesopotamia, but really is modern Iraq, is it a successor state of those states? It's dubious. Or, say Buddha was born in Lumbini, was now in Nepal, so can Nepal claim him when Nepal wasn't thought of for centuries afterwards? Again, it's dubious. So there are other forces which can overlap with nationality, which can help shape nationality: religion, denomination within a religion, within Christianity, Protestantism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy within Protestantism, the Church of Scotland, the Church of England, and so forth. There'd be certain, like, say, Pacific countries, or most people are Methodists or whatever, and I suppose that, to some extent, is part of the national identity. We take countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the Catholic Church is about the only organisation which is nationwide, and the state, well, until quite recently, was very feeble. So obviously language is very important, but this is what's so scintillating, right? Language and nationality are not the same. They can help each other. They can have nothing to do with each other, all right? So for the French language is very important because it is the only country where French is the indigenous language of the majority of people, the only one, even though French is quite a major language, certainly the top 10 in the world. Because take the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's the largest Francophone country in the world, but almost nobody speaks French as their mother tongue. They speak various indigenous Bantu languages. Take Switzerland. Yeah, French is spoken there by a minority as their mother tongue. Even then it's Swiss Roman, saying, 70, 80, 90, way more logical than standard French. I don't know how the French Revolution with its Enlightenment values didn't become more rational in the system of counting, 420s and all the rest of it. And that's that. Canada, yes, there's Quebec, but that's a minority group. Whereas you take India with thousands of languages, and Hindi is really a language of the north, and in the south some of them resent it. They're increasingly trying to shift to Hindi away from English, and that's that. And so English has helped to unite the country, much as you hear this nationalist bull about how the British Raj tried to divide and rule. It did the opposite. It united through railways, through telegraphs, through better roads and bridges, through eventually postal service, telephone. Obviously, there's common language, English, newspapers, things like that going around in all India institutions. Yes, there was governance before, but there wasn't so much as things like the Indian Army or the police force all over the country, and a common educational system, and on and on. All right. So land. Nation can be related to land. How this is our area, sometimes like Cyprus or Kosovo, you've got a map on the flag, or to do with something to do with nature, like the cedar of Lebanon as their symbol. It's to do with a place, usually, but not always. There are exceptions, and I'll come on to those disembodied nations. To do with culture, and of course one culture is not hermetically sealed from the next. Cultures bleed into each other, sometimes literally. So we transmit memes, we receive memes, we have a bit of melange, it evolves through immigration, through emigration, through things like television. State institutions obviously influence national identity. The NHS is quite important to British identity now, I suppose. Take the US military, used to be tiny to the Second World War, and now it's huge. It's quite important to some people's national identity. Or maybe Indian Railways, quite important there. So, the Communist Party in China, things like that. The Communist Party in the Soviet Union. So the fact if you respect the rule of law might be important, or your legislature, or your elected presidency or unelected presidency or monarchy. All these things can help shape a national identity. It's a fascinating way. There's this monarchy in Australia, for instance. Some Australians are against that. 20 years ago, they tried to get rid of it. The Republicans failed. It's still there. Is it hampering the national identity? I don't think so. Some claim that it is. There we are. They're wanting to be an Asian Pacific nation. So the nation state, when did that rise? Possibly in the 18th century. I mean, obviously we'd had printing in Europe since the late 15th century. The Chinese had it for centuries prior to that. We didn't have mass literacy into the 19th century, really. So newspapers going around reasonably fast on stage coaches in the 18th century. And then from 1825, by train and telegraph transmitting news. So identity started to become more national. It was very localized until then. And demotic forms of standard languages were almost incomprehensible to those who lived a few hundred kilometers away. Like how in France, until the mid-19th century, only 50% of people could speak French. Others could only speak their local dialect. Sometimes these were Latinic languages, closely related to French. So Occitan, Canois, Niçois, Langue de Way, Languedoc, Breton, Catalan, Basque, Flemish, Alsatian, German. Am I missing a few? Norman French dialect, Valérois, Dauphinois. There might be some more I've forgotten. Then there was compulsory schooling, certainly in the advanced countries of Europe and North America, and everybody learning to read and write and the standard version of the language and helping build up identity. Marx is very much in favour of this. I know in Ireland some people bitterly resent the way we all learned English in the 19th century, and some Irish-speaking people learned English at school. They could read and write English, they're speaking fluent Irish, but they couldn't write Irish because they'd never been taught to do it. Obviously, Irish was a written language, goes back a very long way. Even before we had the Latin language, we had the Ogham script, writing it in that, prior to the 5th century AD. So it's part of a wider European movement of moving towards standard languages. Well, what else about that? So we've got nation states from that on, and people believe in the nation state should be coterminous. What's a nation? It's very difficult to say. Would share some of these things, and no two nations are quite alike in the factors that unite them. Is it language, religion, religious denomination? Is it meant to be ethnicity? Is it various institutions? Is it culture? And which aspects of culture are those? Is it mythology or poetry, theatre, music, dancing, cuisine, codes of manners, things like that? Clothing, even. Pastimes, sports like the Gaelic Athletic Association in Ireland, so important in being an impetus behind separatist identity, are sports and rejecting garrison sports. That's to say football, rugby, and so on. But there are many multinational states before that, empires, take Austria-Hungary or the Holy Roman Empire and so on. So we seem to be going back to that, actually. Some people say, I remember someone, a Eurocrat I knew, said that she believed that the nation-state was a BS 19th century idea. Okay, bullshit. I shan't burglarize it. That's the word this woman who worked for the European Union said to me. So look at the new policies. We've got the European Union, the African Union, and their multinational states to some extent, or as Oswald Mosley would say, Europe a nation. Mercosur in South America, as in market of the South. It's not got so much of a political aspect, but it might evolve that way. Look at SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and I think the Maldives. So they might have a great deal of unity. Between India and Pakistan, I don't see it happening, but some of the others, the Indian satellites, might do. There's a Commonwealth of Independent States from some former Soviet countries, and the Eurasian Union within that, but it is not evolved into as close cooperation as Russia was hoping, which was to rebuild the Soviet Union in another guise. Scintillating when 11 southern states of the US seceded in 1861, and they all gave a declaration, and one of them, I think it was South Carolina, said, we are resuming our nationhood, which was very revealing, considered themselves to be a nation before the American Revolution, becoming a nation again to then quickly sublimate that into the CSA. So it's to do with territory much of the time. Look at Ireland, we're an island, easy, except the island's divided. People say that islands can't be divided. We don't apply that to East Timor. Of course they can be. There's no legal principle to say that sovereignty cannot cross saline water. But Irish separatists would have us believe that it can, or that the 8 miles between Antrim and Argyll make all the difference in the world, but the difference between Ireland and Bulgaria makes none whatsoever if you're a European nationalist. So I know the Irish nationalists in the 19th century, early 20th century saying, well, we've got to leave the United Kingdom and then have Ireland as a completely sovereign state, but must be united. Well, how was it united in the first place? If we look back to before the English came in the late 12th century, it wasn't even fully united. And when it was united, that was through force. No nation is eternal. These things are man-made. They're not made by the finger of God, as Irish nationalists would have us believe. So people can unmake them, we can remake them. So I remember Sinn Féin's website saying Ireland's always been a nation. Well, obviously they're using a sort of metaphorical sense of always. It's fascinating in Russian the way there are two different words for Russian relating to the state, being a citizen of it, and Russian, the ethnicity. And obviously Russia began at Kievan Rus in what's now Ukraine. That was the cradle of the Russian state. And one of the seminal moments in their history was converting to Christianity when Volodymyr said that they had to convert. And the Ukrainians claim him, but he's Vladimir in Russia. Look at gypsies, a nation in a sense, but without a land. Or look at the Jews, and some of them wanted a land without a people for a people without a land. But many Jews reject Israeli identity, and not all Israelis are Jewish. Then Muslims have got the Ummah, the worldwide Muslim community, Dar al-Islam, the land of Islam, the haven of Islam. So you see how religion is used to found nations like Pakistan, which used to include Bangladesh, but that didn't pan out, and the Bangladeshi split off. But they didn't rejoin India. And obviously Judaism, in a sense, formed Israel, even though to some extent it's a secular state. So look at the Spanish Constitution, they talk about the nations of Spain, which I thought was very telling. But they won't allow Catalonia to be independent even within the European Union. And Bedouin tribes, they reject nationalism as such, but it's a tribe and nation. And they want as little to do with the state as possible, keep themselves to themselves. They're not interested in any wider entity, which is why some Bedouins in Israel supported Israel. I'm not sure why they just didn't become neutral. Look at Saudi Arabia. The very country is named after one family, the royal family, one tribe which mastered the others. So, as I said, language can be an important force behind all this. You look at multilingual states like India with thousands of languages, with 14 official languages, and India's subdivided into many states, each of which has got several official languages. But in a sense, language is less important to identity now as we're increasingly in an Anglophone world. And perhaps English ought to be called internationalese. So nationality is something which is always so interesting and baffling. Well, these are some of my uncollected thoughts in it. I don't know quite what else to say.